Hey, I'm singer-songwriter, producer Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 27 of Music is Not a Genre. Do it with me, MxG! Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. This week's topic, The Great Producers, Part 8, the 2020s, and what's next. We'll get right into that very soon, but first, as always, thank you for watching and listening. You got the mid-roll. I don't need to do all my spiel, but I will say like, share, subscribe, rate, review, and please tell one person about this show, at least one person, anyone you think loves music to a very alarming degree, like me. I think they'd be into this show. Please do that. Word of mouth means more than anything. And I will also say that if you go to youtube.com/@RecBandNYC. You can see all new videos for Rec's epic album Kite to Camden. They are all there now. I'm actually working on another live show related to those videos, which will happen on October 21st here in New York City. And I'll tell you more about that as it gets closer, or you can look on the website, nickdimatteo.com/music, and you can find everything there. That's it. Let's get to it again. This week's topic, The Great Producers, Part 8, the 2020s, and what's next. And the thing about this Part 8 is that it's also the final part of my Great Producer series. We have gone through a whirlwind of a journey, mixing metaphors, through this season, starting all the way with the prehistory and all of that, all the way up until this episode. And we'll talk about where that gets us very soon. Of course, the subtitle is What's Next? And it is the 2020s. And that's what this is going to be about. But here's what's going to be covered in this show totally. And that's the show format. As with other episodes in this series, I'm going to start with the tech and music changes. Then I will do all of the great producers that I at least have listed here. And there are quite a few in the 2020s so far. Conclusions, including my favorite producers from this decade. And then we do a full wrap of the series. From the beginning, I give you a brief summary of what we covered with some helpful other information and tidbits and everything. And I end by ranking my favorite producers from each decade, or at least going decade by decade and saying, what are my favorite producers from each one of those decades, and some runners-up as well. That is what is in store here, as well as, of course, the featured song and questions for you, and the bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/music is not a genre is every decade is 2 decades in one. So what does that mean? Well, you'll find out more at patreon.com/music is not a genre. But what I'll tell you now is that music changes more rapidly than we think, at least for most of modern music history. And I go through in this bonus how really you could break each decade up into halves. Not exact halves, but pretty close. And I go into all the whys and that, the characteristics of each half, and how it morphed and changed and led into the next phase and all of that stuff. And that is, again, the bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/music is not a genre. Sources, Google, Wikipedia. I mean, I think I listened to some music in various areas. I really didn't use many other sources. My own knowledge, I guess. And disclaimers, as always, while my producer choices are not arbitrary, they are incomplete. And they're probably biased to a degree, and I try to own up to that bias as it happens. So I will miss some, and you can tell me which ones I missed. I may add some you think, why did you mention them? That's okay too. Let me know that. Again, most great producers worked in more than one decade, so I'm going to end up mentioning some that I had mentioned before, but then a whole bunch of new ones as well. Okay. And that's it as far as disclaimers and all that other, preliminary show stuff goes. So why don't we get into it, starting with tech and music changes in the 2020s. Listen, the 2020s are barely half over now. There's still been some very significant technology and music changes, and a couple that will for sure shape music for at least the next 15 years as far as I'm concerned, and a lot of culture. I think some of those you kind of know what I'm talking about. Others maybe not so much, Oddly enough, those decades where I mentioned that tech and music were so tied together that they had to be discussed as one have passed. really what's happened is the flow of music creation has reached a kind of stasis over the last 15 years, allowing music to go where it wants without significant influence from technology. Here and there, but not nearly as significant as some of the changes in history. And I do go over how that has affected the death of genre bias. You have heard that episode, I believe, last week. That was one of the bonuses. There is one big exception to this, though, and that is the first on my list. And I think you know where I'm going with that. We'll see. The others on this list are more or less continuations of previous trends, again, with only one or two exceptions. So that first tech and music change on the list, anybody want to say it with me? 3, 2, 1, AI. Everybody's talking about AI. AI becomes a creative tool. It's probably the biggest story here in the first half of the 2020s. Unlike previous technological shifts like MIDI and DAWs and auto-tune and everything, AI isn't just another instrument, it's a collaborator. It's both, really. We are seeing AI create lyrics, assist with arrangement, separating stems, which I find valuable, mastering, voice cloning, synthetic instruments, generative composition. Now, some of those things are the things that people are railing against, like generative composition, like creating lyrics. Some people would voice cloning for sure. Some people would even rail against the mastering because it itself is not as intuitive as humans could be. I've tried it. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Now, does that mean that maybe the way I master things is kind of okay already? I don't know. All I know is that it doesn't seem to, and then again, this is free, the free version. I'm sure high-end AI mastering is a whole lot better. But let's remember that a lot of AI is just a different form of automation. And so when you get with things like arrangement assistance, it's like high-end automation. It helps you arrange something. I think that's hugely valuable. Stem separation is essential for all music creators these days, and that is one of the most valuable things, especially when you are dealing with songs that are archival and you don't have the original tracks, and they help you extract those, what Peter Jackson did, et cetera, et cetera. Even producers who never generate entire songs with AI use it to speed up workflow. That's me. Actually, that's not me yet. There are things that I have done with AI, musically speaking, but not much at all. I've done more with AI when it comes to helping me sort out ideas and stuff like that and create some kind of low-end graphic ideas. Just sort things out, basically. Sorting tool. This may eventually be viewed similarly to how DAWs transformed production in the 1990s and the 2000s, but it may be bigger than that. Of course, Peter Jackson, what he did with the Beatles doc, pushed AI extraction and cleanup forward very quickly and changed the standard big time. Rick Rubin has done AI-assisted experimentation. Timbaland embraces AI voices publicly, and Grimes opens her voice to AI collaborators, which can be fun if you have control of it. It's important for everyone who creates something to have control of what they've created, or at least whoever owns it. 2, sampling evolves into stem manipulation. Rather than sampling finished records, producers increasingly isolate vocals, remove drums, separate instruments, rebuild arrangements. AI-powered stem separation has transformed remix culture. I haven't done that yet for remixes. I have done it for, there's a sync licensing agent I have. They may have needed an instrumental version. The live show I'm doing, I need instrumental versions for that. Some of those songs I was unable to fully, find the track, the original sessions. So I had to do some stem separation there. It was more partial than anything else, but I can, again, imagine it being an incredible tool. 3, the death of the recording studio as a requirement. This really started in the 2010s. And I think it started, honestly, in the 2000s. In fact, I know a guy I met a couple of weeks ago at a restaurant. He's a bartender there. He had a recording studio in the 2000s, spent a lot of money on it and on the equipment. It closed within 5 years because even by the 2000s, people were recording more at home because who can afford studios, And now, yes, we all go into studios every now and then. I'll be in a studio later this month, but most of what I do, the vast majority, is at home. Some people say laptop. For me, it's desktop. Same difference. You need a headphone. You need an interface. You need a decent microphone. That's pretty much it. And you can make charting records. Even major artists record vocals, finished vocals in hotel rooms. They all exchange stems remotely, something that had been done track-wise as early as the early 2000s with the Postal Service, that band, and made it famous, but I'm sure even before then. But that's just common now. You don't need to be in the same room as anybody when you're recording, even though it's more fun that way and sometimes more dynamic. But you can finish songs across continents, and that helps everybody. And of course, COVID accelerated this dramatically, which, by the way, when I talk in the bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music is not a genre, about every decade is 2 decades, and we talk about the cultural shifts that help to bring about musical shifts. COVID was certainly one of them. 4, bedroom producers become the norm. It's not an exception anymore. By the end of the 2010s, it was becoming close to being the rule. Now it's pretty much the rule. A lot of producers begin with at home with Ableton, which is what I use, or FL Studio, which is Fruity Loops, or Logic. Very inexpensive interfaces. I tell people all the time, don't spend a lot of money on equipment. Make sure it works. Make sure your environment is good. And that's all you need. Sample libraries, I don't use a lot of those. What I do use are all cleared and free, but I like to create my own. I know that. The barriers to entry have never been lower. Number 5, remote collaboration becomes normal. We talked a little bit about this up ahead there a couple of minutes ago. Producers no longer need to be in the room. Sessions routinely involve, let's say, a producer in LA and a vocalist in London and a guitarist in Nashville and a mixer in Sweden. Doesn't matter. They can all get together and make it work. Cloud storage and high-speed internet finally made this frictionless. What still can't happen is you can't jam remotely, because that is a physics issue that I don't think will ever be overcome. Talk to me about that later. 6, TikTok changes songwriting. This may be the defining musical influence. Songs increasingly prioritize shortness, immediate hooks, and memorable pieces in the first 10 or 20 seconds, repeatability, quotable lyrics. Now, you could say that's true for all of pop music ever, but it's been accelerated and compressed far more with TikTok and other social media. Number 7, songs continue getting shorter. We just talked about this. The average hit length has fallen, and again, it's because of streaming economics, TikTok and things like that. Attention spans, which ebb and flow. I don't think an attention span just keeps diminishing as the years go on. I think we're at a bit of an ebb now, but that will change. And again, social media, playlist competition. You need to be short enough for people to hit it and quit it and understand what you're doing in 2 minutes sometimes. Some of those songs are 2 minutes. Which goes back to really the original single era, when songs were, from some of the first hit songs by the Beatles were like 2.5 minutes. Number 8, genre stops being a useful category. Again, last week's episode, the bonus, was the death of genre bias. It began really in the 2010s, accelerated by streaming. It became almost complete by the middle of this century. Right now, today's producers freely combine hyperpop with country, with trap, with folk, with indie rock, with drum and bass. I've heard a lot of drum and bass, with Afrobeats, with house, with Latin pop. Young listeners often don't even think in genres anymore. Some still do, and I've bumped into them, but many, 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 far more don't. Number 9, producers become public personalities. Producers have always had fans, but social media changed the relationship. Now producers regularly build audiences for themselves and their music and their artists by showing beat breakdowns, studio sessions, plug-in walkthroughs, songwriting, live streams, etc., etc., etc. The producer is, in many cases, becoming as visible as the artist. And again, it's an offshoot of both social media and streaming, and especially, I think, the podcast boom, because it's easy for anyone to do what I'm doing now. And I was certainly not the first. I was earlier than many people in 2019. Certainly not the first. And my God, that has exploded, quite a bit. And I will say that that's sort of a full circle thing, where there was a time in history where producers were more personalities, and then hardly anybody talked about them. And now almost every producer has some kind of a visible presence. The trend of producers helping with songwriting has gone from suggesting things to assisting to collaborating to full creation. And that's something I can't remember if I talk about this in the conclusions as well, but I think I do. But it's basically gone from producers picking the artist to guiding. I'm not going to go into it too much because I do go into it later. But their process now is so much more involved with the artist and even just creating the artist at many times. Not that hasn't happened in the past. It's happened since forever, really. But especially since the 50s, early 60s. But boy, is it happening now. And number 10, Dolby Atmos and spatial audio. For the first time since stereo, labels are seriously investing in a new playback format. Now, we've had these things before, and they haven't taken hold, partly because they're more expensive, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see if this becomes culturally significant. It's really hard to tell. Again, it might be the economics of it, but it is in large part, if the industry adopts it, that's A, including the artists and the business people, etc. If it's promoted, B, and then if people can afford it, is C. But it is already changing how some producers think about mixing. This is a small note because it doesn't affect most of us. I predict that this will eventually have a huge future impact because sound tends to modulate in ways and morph, and our let's say our standards of what quality sound is have dropped quite a bit in the last 20 years. And I think it's time for that cycle to, go the other way. And I think this might be what does it. That's it, though, as far as the list of tech and music changes. Again, there is a stasis that's happened since at least the middle of the 2010s, I would say. So there's not much else that has changed since then. I think I covered pretty much all the big changes. Let me know if I missed anything. That brings us to the next section. Why are we here? Great producers of the 2020s. So some of these were mentioned in the previous decade, but they continue to make a huge impact in the 2020s, so I have to mention them again. Of course, I'm going to miss some. Again, please tell me who I missed. This time around, I am not going to divide strictly by genre because the crossovers are so frequent and genre walls are breaking down that there's no clean way to do that. So it's just a list. And I'm going to start and sort of finish this list with the retreads. So the first retread, I got to get this out of the way just in case I get physically ill and need to regroup and start this over. I feel like if I just pump it out right now, that's not going to happen. And that is Jack Antonoff. Even though he's one of my least favorite producers, and I am sort of joking here, there's no denying he is still huge and moreover might be the most likely to be remembered as the producer of the first half of the 2020s. No matter how I feel about him, I kind of think that's true. Again, the first half isn't going to be the same as the second half of this decade, as per the bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music is not a genre, where I break decades from the 1920s to today into halves, if not more. With an ever-growing roster that includes Taylor Swift, Lana Del Rey, Lorde, Sabrina Carpenter, and more, how can you not mention Jack Antonoff? No matter what I feel about him, it is right that I am mentioning him again. Metro Boomin, mentioned him in the last episode. You have to mention him again. He continues to help define modern-day hip-hop and has even influenced electropop. His sound has become the template for modern trap production while elevating the producer to superstar status. Metro Boomin is just somebody that I've heard about for quite a while now, and that's not a usual thing with producers. But it is also for someone else, Phineas O'Connell. His work with Billie Eilish reshaped mainstream pop. He's like the more ambient, fluid, and frankly more interesting and tasteful doppelganger of Jack Antonoff. He's riding the wave of ambient music, mellow music that's almost background music, but not quite, depending on who produces it. I sometimes call it the blandscape, but that only really applies to when the music doesn't work. And I feel like what Phineas does really does work. He's known for whisper vocals, huge dynamic range, which is something that doesn't happen in the blandscape. He can add huge dynamic range to his productions while still being mellow. That's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in this episode. Sparse arrangements, which is something I'm working on with the next rec project. Cinematic sound design. Minimalist production, home studio workflow. We talked about that. Meticulous sonic detail. Very true. No doubt, though he hasn't worked with a ton of other artists, his influence does extend far beyond Billie Eilish. So many other artists, and in particular young female artists, have incorporated his aesthetic. Again, Skrillex, already legendary from the 2010s, but his 2023 comeback showed remarkable evolution. Instead of chasing the same dubstep trends, he has fused UK garage, house, bass music, hip-hop, experimental electronic. Many producers cite these recent records as hugely influential. How often is an artist influential more than once? And he is. He has evolution and continued success. It's hard to come by in any realm, but especially in EDM and with DJs, and he's done it. Hit Boy. He is responsible for much of Nas's late career renaissance as he balances soulful samples, modern drums, polished arrangements. He brought samples back to hip-hop, which I think is cool because I've always loved samples, and I also love the neo-soul and you know, certain areas of hip-hop where there were no samples, the roots and all of that stuff, or even other electronic hip-hop that doesn't use samples, but samples are fun. Now, the reason why they haven't been used as often is because they cost money, but there's a way to do it. And especially if you're somebody like Hit Boy who, you know, has the backing. The Alchemist, one of the most respected producers alive. The 2020 cemented his legendary status. He's become the producer serious rappers seek out, including some I particularly like the sound of Action Bronson, Earl Sweatshirt, and Nas, some of Nas's newer stuff. I think Action Bronson and Earl Sweatshirt have great sound. Even though I don't always jibe with a particular single song, just to listen to the whole album is great. And that's, look, I've been complaining about that, the blandscape and all of that stuff. If I'm saying you can listen through to an album, even if none of the particular single songs stand out, that's a different thing because songs are a different art form than albums. Fred again, ... One of the decade's most innovative producers. He's known for found sounds, which is something I've worked a little bit with. Voice note sampling, emotional house music, live looping, voice note sampling. Man, I did that in the 80s. Blurred the lines between producer, DJ, songwriter, and live performer while incorporating everyday audio into emotionally resonant dance music, my favorite kind of dance music. He changed expectations for what electronic performance can be, working with people like Burna Boy and Ed Sheeran. Kaytranada, I think it's pronounced that way, continues blending house, funk, R&B, and hip-hop. Great blend. His groove-first approach has inspired countless younger producers, and I think even people like Ray. I love his sound for the people he's produced, such as Anderson .Paak. Roger Shayahed, again, I think that's how it's pronounced, or Chahayed. Increasingly influential. He's known for unusual harmonic ideas and genre-blending pop. He has a left-field sound that still hits up the middle with people like, and listen to this, Travis Scott, Doja Cat, Drake and Kendrick, Jack Harlow. In general, I really like his work. I like his aesthetic, his sound. Boy Wonder, that's spelled BOI-1DA. Still among the most influential mainstream hip-hop producers, continues producing major hits while adapting to changing styles. I think that is important for producers. I don't know that all producers do that. I'm not going to mention names. Works with huge names like Eminem, Rihanna, Jay-Z, and again, both Drake and Kendrick. Tay Keith, one of trap's defining architects, massive influence on commercial rap production, as heard in his work with people like Travis Scott, Drake, and Megan Thee Stallion. Ian Kirkpatrick, known for working with Dua Lipa, Justin Bieber, and Selena Gomez, among others. Crisp, groove-heavy pop. Thick sound while still popping. Also worked with Britney Spears and Jason Derulo. He's sort of continuing that, pop, rock, electro sound that was really big in the late 2000s and early 2010s and then faded. It's a new version of that, I think. Afrobeats, the producer P2J is one of the defining producers behind that type of music and the worldwide explosion of it. He's worked with Burna Boy, Wizkid, and someone named Beyonce. Was it Beyonce? I don't know. I'm not familiar. Taney, or Tiny, Tainy, it's probably Tiny, one of the architects of modern Latin music. His influence rivals Max Martin within the Latin pop world. He's worked with Raul Alejandro, J Balvin, and Bad Bunny. I'm thinking big people. Joey Moy is behind major country music releases from Hardy and Morgan Wallen, one of the architects of country's increasingly pop and rock-oriented production. It's kind of creating the new Nashville MOR sound mixed with the sound of country from like the, again, late 90s, early 2000s that was really incorporating a lot of rock. Sean Everett, one of today's most adventurous producers in the world, particularly of alternative music. He's known for working with Casey Musgraves, The War on Drugs, Alabama Shakes, and The Killers. So kind of rootsy alternative into many degrees there. He pushes studio experimentation without sacrificing accessibility. You have Andrew Watt, who is a fascinating crossover producer. He's one I'd never heard of until recently. And then album after track after album after track pops up where I say, I really like the production of this. And it turns out, who did it? Andrew Watt. It's a very short sampling of who he's produced. It's very short compared to the actual list. Ozzy Osbourne's Ordinary Man in 2020, Eddie Vedder's Earthling in 2022, Post Malone's Austin in 2023, Pearl Jam's Dark Matter in 2024, the theme song to the show The Rooster, starring Steve Carell. Sorry, everybody. Brain fog there. That theme song for that show Rooster with Michael Stipe, and I love that song. Paul McCartney's The Boys of Dungeon Lane. The Rolling Stones' Foreign Tongues also worked a little on their album Hackney Diamonds from 2023. I mean, I've heard almost every single one of those albums and actually like them a lot. He's a young guy who both understands rock and its history and tastefully bring things into the 2020s in ways that still honor the artists he's working with. And then I believe is this almost the last one here, Dan Nigro, one of the biggest breakout producers of the decade. I've been waiting to talk about this guy. His credits include Conan Gray, Sky Ferreira, Conan, one day I'll get that right, Chappell Roan, and Olivia Rodrigo, among others. He's helping bring guitars and rock dynamics back into mainstream pop, defining a new wave of pop with those artists and others, blending rock, pop, and singer-songwriter influences. It's a great mix. What's particularly interesting is that Nigro's rise represents a reaction against some dominant 2010s trends, where much of 2010s pop emphasized EDM influences, trap beats, heavily programmed production, maximalism. Nigro's biggest records often foreground live instruments, rock guitars, dynamic arrangements, vocal personality, less quantized, more human performances. But he also seems to represent a reaction against the blandscape of subsuming an artist's personality into a producer's sound. He, again, can make sure that the artist is represented as their personality, not just in the lyrics, not just in the instruments you choose, but in all of it. And B, allows that dynamic range to flourish, the way I talked about with Phineas, and I would say even more. And to round out this list, and before we might get to a break soon, those retreads I mentioned, the beginning and the end, legacy producers who are still shaping the decade. They were already legends, but they're still making highly influential records, even if they're not at the top of the news. And since I've already profiled all of these, some more than once, you'll see, I'll just mention them again so you're aware that they're still making waves. Greg Kurstin, Mark Ronson, one of my faves, Danger Mouse, and of course Rick Rubin. I think he holds the record for having been mentioned in more decades than any other producer that I have profiled in this entire 8-part series. So that is my list of great producers of the 2020s. Let's dip into the conclusions before we take a break. This conclusion section is going to be different because, again, it's actually split in two. Similar to the bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music is not a genre, about how decades are split into two, which I'm excited to share with you. I am going to split this conclusion sections in two. The first part will be conclusions for this decade so far, including my favorite producers in this decade so far. The second part will be my series summary, a wrap, anything anyone I missed, etc. My favorite producers overall in each decade, and maybe most importantly, why I did this series in the first place and why it matters, which I think is very crucial here. So we're going to do the 2020s conclusions first, along with some predictions of what the second half of this decade might bring. Predictions. And again, you know that the second half of this decade is usually very different from the first half if you tune into my bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music is not a genre, where I say every decade is actually 2 decades in one. But before we get to the wrap for the 2020s, we're going to take that mid-roll break. So I will talk to you in a minute. Hey, MxG fans, thank you as always for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdamadio.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, please take some time out to go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band rec, and everything I do for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of everything I do, nickdamadio.com really does have it all. If you're interested in unique and quirky t-shirts that I've all personally hand designed, go to nickdamadio.com/shop and you can find it all there, including discounts if you sign up for my newsletter or Patreon. If you're someone who's always wanted to write a song, has just never figured out how to get there, let me work with you. I am the song coach. Go to nickdamadio.com/thesongcoach, and whether you're a complete beginner or completely advanced, I can get you there. You can book a free 30-minute call right there on the site. And of course, I am always releasing new music. Go to nickdamadio.com/music to find it all. My complete discography is there. All of the social links are there. And of course, please like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do it for the podcast. Do it for the music. Sharing is especially valuable to all of us indie creators. I really appreciate your support, your eyes and ears. Thank you for hanging with me for this mid-roll, and let's get back to the show. All right, everyone, we are back, and if those of you watching see that I have fluffy hair, it's because it's freaking humid here, and I can't record this with air conditioning. It makes too much noise. But anyway, let's get back to where we are, which is wrapping up this series with a summary of the 2020s, first of all, and then a summary of the whole series. So the biggest musical trend of the 2020s, I don't think there's a defining sound of the 2020s. I don't think there's a new genre that has popped out that has made huge splashes. I think the biggest musical trend is the collapse of boundaries, the death of genre bias, especially within the music community. We've been discussing this for a while now. It's been fully embraced across the board, I think, now more than ever, despite what naysayers might say, and there are still always going to be those out there. Most huge records now mix influences without apology. Some examples include combinations like country with hip-hop. We know that's huge right now. Folk with EDM, just so cool. Indie with house, rock and trap, jazz and R&B. And that's something that's been around for a while. A lot of these people have kind of touched on, and they've become more novelty in the past. But right now, that's music. That makes this decade feel less like the birth of a single movement like punk or grunge or disco, and more like the era when every style became available simultaneously. Started in the 2010s, and we are there now. We are fully there. We'll talk about whether or not that's going to continue a little bit later. What this really means is some new genres will pop up out of this when seemingly incongruous stuff starts to get combined, almost as a novelty, which is happening. Eventually, some of that settles into a new sound that gets fleshed out on its own over the course of the following decade or two. That's how new genres and subgenres are formed. We've been waiting for this because the death of genre bias I talked about last week really diminished new trend and genre development, which is fine because it just meant everything was open and it equalized everything far more than ever before. But it's always fun to be like, oh, hyperpop, that was new, almost 10 years ago or whenever that was. And then what else is coming? Reggaeton was new at a certain point, like all these things that we can talk about, genres that you can mention to people who aren't even huge music fans and they would have heard of them. There really haven't been any that have popped up lately like that. I think that's going to happen. And my hope is that when it does, it will not reignite genre bias. It'll just add genres to what's possible. But let's still keep in mind, though, as I said in my recent Podfast a couple of weeks ago, the landscape is still holding on. It's still enticing enough for producers, artists, and fans that it will not go away, which is fine. But it's as if these producers want to be Steve Reich or Brian Eno, even if they don't know it. They're trying to go that minimalist route in a way that's, clever. They're not clever enough to pull it off. They're just not good enough to flesh out any of the subtlety. So it just gets repetitive and backgroundy in far less compelling ways than, Brian Eno himself is saying that's not what he meant. Especially considering there are freaking vocals. Should be more compelling. And it's like deliberately made uncompelling. But then again, as I said, it's fine that backgroundy music is holding on for two reasons. One, other things will rise up to equal it, and that's already happening. And number two, it will morph into more interesting versions of itself. Every genre does. Sometimes it gets convoluted and over heavy and overbearing the way prog rock did, but it took a while to get there. And while that was developing, a lot of great things happened. I think that's going to happen for this kind of music too. The Spotify mood music factor and how streaming morphs in the next few years will be the true test of what ends up dominating or receding or even combining. How much influence will Spotify and the like continue to have on the actual creation of music? Well, I predict that by the end of the decade, we'll be hearing more dynamic music topping the charts and even more genre morphing. It's already starting to happen. Where the hell is my husband and stuff like that. Like, you're getting more dynamic music topping the charts across the board in all genres. Still not as much as the mellower music, but I think it's going to happen more and more. And again, more genre morphing. I also predict there will be at least one new subgenre for every main music genre. For example, the new crop of hip-hop influenced country will expand and morph into something that's less of the patina of hip-hop, which is what I think it is now in many ways, and a more daring and integrated sound that does something new rather than just mashes things up. I predict that artists will not have made much progress in terms of revenue inequality and all of that stuff, and that though many streaming alternatives will continue to pop up, like Subvert is an alternative to Bandcamp, which was an alternative to Spotify. Subvert, I'm on Subvert now. If you go to subvert.fm/rec, REC, you will find my music there. Patronize me there and all of the artists there because it's much better for us than it is for streaming. But streaming will still favor the rich, I should say, and streaming will still favor the rich. I also think some small changes will happen that will direct a little more revenue and incentive to smaller artists, but not enough to make enough of an impact. Not yet. Regulation has to happen. That's true for all of anything to do with money and politics. Regulation. Forcing people who want to hoard the money to do something else with it. Finally, I predict that though we'll still hear a lot of fear about AI. By 2030, it'll be so integrated into every part of everything that the nuanced conversations we're already having in certain small ways will increase. And the talk will be more about how to use AI as opposed to whether to use it, which means musicians can actively use it as a part of their creative and recording flows. And yes, that's going to start to produce more homogeneous music. That's happened before, where certain processes have been put into place where it's made a lot of music sound the same, but then things have changed and broken out. People have used those same tools in new ways. It's happened also for graphics. It's happened for video. It's, what is it, AI slop, they call it, I think. It's happened for writing. You have to be careful when you use AI to really edit and make it your own. But then other AI stuff will pop up that will be the antidote to that. Stuff that mixes things together in bizarre and futuristic ways, musically speaking, kind of the way hyperpop remixed the elements of pop and rock and EDM. I look forward to seeing in what ways those things can be mixed together that are compelling. I'll talk about this to a larger degree in my bonus MxTRA, patreon.com/music is not a genre, which I talk about every decade is really 2 decades in one. That's it for the conclusions and predictions and for this part of the 2020s. Before we get to the series wrap, let me give you my current favorite producers of the 2020s. So honorable mentions right off the bat, I've got 3. The Alchemist, Rosé Shayahed, and Ian Kirkpatrick for holding down that dynamic pop lane. It used to be the thing that I mentioned in the O's and 2010s. But The Alchemist and Rosé Jaya had just their sound in general. It mixes so many things and is so compelling. Those are my runner-ups. As far as favorites, the albums that keep popping up that I feel rise above the blandscape are quite often produced by one of two guys, either Andrew Watt or Dan Nigro. And I've got a comment I'll save after I talk about these guys. I mentioned in an older review episode that I would love to work with Dan Nigro, and indeed, I did reach out to him. He said nothing yet. He has not responded, but I will reach out again. Why do I want to work with him? Because he understands how to incorporate the full dynamic range and the artist's personality and seems to encourage the artist to explore all of it. He mixes genres as fluidly as others in this and the previous decade, but makes sure to include actual rock and not rock light, which bridges a glaring recent gap. And you may already know that one favorite musical nexus of mine is the merging of rock and electro with other genres like hip-hop and funk and etc. Rec is basically that, and folk and some other things. I like doing that mixing. And it's not to say that rock light is a bad thing. It's just not my bag, you know. And so those are my favorites, Ian Kirkpatrick and Dan Nigro. Now, I have to make a general comment since we're just getting started in the series wrap before I get there, because I didn't write this down and it's come to mind and I think it's worth mentioning. And that is that I have mentioned in previous decades that women were playing a larger part in music production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there was some I mentioned, you know, in the last episode in this series, and you know, and in the 90s and 2000s as well. I gotta be honest, I expected far more women to pop up on these lists, and I'd like to know why they haven't. Are they not being given credit for their production? Is that what it is? Are they just not out there? Are they not getting work? Please, somebody talk to me about this. I want to know where all the female producers and movers are. But let's finally do a summary of the whole series, all 8 episodes, or 7.5, or whatever. It will include things I've missed, and also, as stated, I'll talk about why I did this and why it matters. So I started way back, episode 1, with a discussion of the prehistory of producers before the role even existed and what that word meant back then. In fact, before we get to the comprehensive wrap-up, let's kick it off with the evolving definition of what producer has meant through the ages. This is a nice review. It's a really good encapsulation here. In the 1950s, a producer was a discoverer. It was finding the artist that would change everything, and understanding how recording good sound actually worked. That was pretty much it. In the 1960s, a producer was more of an artist. He was turning the studio into a canvas, learning how to use the studio as a tool that went beyond just capturing live music. In the 1970s, a producer was a sonic architect, building entire worlds of sound. It was the true coming of age of what it meant to be a producer, I think. And beyond that, no new production roles have really been added since the 1970s. Certain skills, absolutely, and genres and everything. But as far as roles, everything that was going to be done was already being done by the 70s. As far as roles, again, not sound. 1980s, producer is a technology pioneer, harnessing the digital revolution and understanding how to integrate these newfangled non-human sounds into the usual analog recording and structuring of things. 1990s, producer was a craftsperson, blending analog with digital. It was a real crossover decade, as I mentioned. Programming, sampling, and sculpting the future, all of that with analog, embracing that not everything recorded needs to be played. And then that's okay. Didn't used to be okay. 2000s, producer was a beat architect and a songwriter, creating the rhythm-driven mainstream. Beats, creating beats, that's when that whole thing really, it certainly existed before then, but that's when it really rose to the fore and has been with us ever since. Backing tracks used as jumping off points for artists of all kinds to write. But they also started writing the songs for them in many ways, and that would increase. 2010s, producer's a sound designer and the artist creator, crafting textures, atmospheres, and even identities. Much more involvement in creating the artist, not just the sound. 2020s, producer is an entire creative ecosystem. The producer becomes the entire platform. So that's the morphing of producers. Now, the thing is, it's not just that the role of producer changed from one to the other through the decades. It's that it added each of these. So all of them exist. As I profiled on one of my shared bonus episodes about the different producer archetypes, which I did a few months ago, look it up, producer archetypes, youtube.com/appmusic is not a genre. Producers of today could be any combination of all these or just one or two, or all the way up, though the Machiavellian paradigm is still currently the most prominent, the one where the producer basically creates the artists and the songs, if not entirely, then in large part. Okay, so let's summarize this series by fleshing out all of them. I kind of did that. No, actually, I'm going to flesh them out as we go here. But first, I'll say that one thing this series has illustrated is that though the producer has always been in control, they have gained more and more of that control as the years have passed, spreading their influence beyond just the music, shaping and recording, to music and even artist creation. So I'll also, now that happened way back beginning too, so it's like full circle. I'll also mention some missed producers. And keep in mind, I'm not going to mention all the producers I missed. I didn't miss many, but I did miss a few. And that just is a sort of a sample of, well, I missed one or two. Who else did I miss? Let me know. So 1950s, that producer is discoverer. The birth of the modern record maker. The producer's primary role was finding extraordinary voices and artists and capturing the energy of a new musical revolution. Rock and roll, R&B, country, and pop were still being defined. And the studio was mostly a place to document performances rather than to reshape them. And the big shifts in the 50s, technologically, widespread adoption of magnetic tape, hadn't been done much prior to that. Growth of multi-track recording in its early stages. Better microphones and studio technique. The rise of the independent record label, which is important. The sound was very raw, immediate, emotional, and performance-driven. Who did I miss? When it comes to the development of popular country music, this is kind of a glaring omission. Owen Bradley was a huge mover in transforming the raw honky-tonk sound into the sophisticated pop of the Nashville sound. He worked with Brenda Lee, Loretta Lynn, Jim Reeves, Conway Twitty, who rose to stardom right at first or more so after working with him. Also rock and roll singers such as Buddy Holly and Gene Vincent. He even helped bring older artists more fame by updating their sound. Jim Reeves, as mentioned, and Patsy Cline in particular. Country's chart success would not have been nearly as impactful without Owen Bradley. 1960s, the producer is artist. The studio becomes an instrument. Producers begin moving beyond capturing performances and started creating experiences. Recording became a form of composition with experimentation in layering, effects, orchestration, unconventional arrangements. Technology shifts here. Expansion of multi-track recording, not super large, but much larger. Double and quadruple maybe. Tape manipulation, splicing, etc. Overdubbing, reverse, etc. Introduction of effects like reverb, delay, distortion, and compression as creative tools. The growing use of stereo sound. The sound in the 60s, experimental, colorful, expansive, and increasingly cinematic. Engulfing you. Who did I miss? Holland Dozier, Holland, almost aren't. Two of them are still alive. Just great songwriters. They didn't just give the songs to the artists and let them do the shaping. They essentially created the sound of artists like the Supremes, the Four Tops, Martha Reeves. They were as important to Motown's success as Smokey and Berry Gordy and the others. I think so. 1970s, the producer is sonic architect. The album becomes a world. I love that. I try to do that, although not in a 70s way, but I still try to do it. The producer's job expanded in creating entire sonic environments, longer formats, bigger budgets, improved studio technology, allowed artists to develop deeper identities and more ambitious recordings. Technology shifts, we're going up to 16 and 24 track analog recording and became the standard. Very sophisticated mixing consoles, a lot more outboard gear. The wide introduction of synthesizers into mainstream production. Drum machines just get started. Early home recording systems even appear. And the sound here, rich, layered, immersive, highly individualized. Great time for expansion. Who did I miss? I didn't miss anyone huge, but there's a group of producers whose influence started underground in this decade, and that underground sound eventually blew up to influence all subsequent decade, so a brief spotlight on them. Jack Douglas was great at capturing a band's raw energy and mostly leaned toward that live sound. He captured Aerosmith's early grit, and he did Cheap Trick's seminal live album, Cheap Trick at Budokan. Sandy Pearlman, both producer and manager for Blue Oyster Cult, helped define their cerebral heavy metal style, layered arrangements, and darker themes. Eddie Offord, producer and sound engineer in Britain for behemoths like ELP and Yes. And finally, Leon Silvers III, primary producer for Solar Records, helped define late 70s R&B and disco with bass-heavy grooves. Think Shalimar and the Whispers. And again, the late 70s were very different from the early 70s, something I will flesh out in the bonus MxTRA at patreon.com/music is not a genre. Every decade is at least 2 decades in one. The 1980s, the producer as technology pioneer. Machine joins the band. The producer became a bridge between musicians and rapidly evolving technology. Digital tools transformed songwriting, arrangement, and sound creation, allowing producers to build records in entirely new ways, often gotten from previous artists who picked up on some of the cheaper equipment and used it in their music, and then producers picked up on that, etc., although most of it was very, very expensive back then. Some technology shifts. Digital recording begins replacing analog workflows. Not in terms of the tape. That wasn't happening much, but in terms of the instruments. MIDI connects instruments and computers. That's huge. Sampling becomes mainstream. Not as big as it would get, but it becomes mainstream. Drum machines and synthesizers dominate all kinds of production. Early digital workstations emerge, as I talked about in that bonus. The sound is polished, programmed, synthetic, and larger than life. Who did I miss? Well, here's one. Arthur Baker was an important production connector between hip-hop, punk, and electronic and new wave music, as noted for working with artists like Africa Bambaataa and New Order. 1990s, the producer as digital craftsman. The producer becomes a sculptor of recorded sound. This is where I really learned what it meant to be a producer, even though I didn't fully form as a producer until later. I did some work in the 80s, but the 90s, I understood that idea of sculpting sound. Digital technology gave producers unprecedented control. Sampling, editing, computer-based production allowed recordings to be manipulated at microscopic levels. We're used to that now. While alternative scenes embraced more organic approaches, and the combination of the two. Technology shifts, affordable digital audio workstations emerge. Yes, hard disk recording expands. Software editing transforms production. Sampling becomes a central creative language, and home studios become increasingly viable, although not yet that widespread. The sound, precision meets experimentation. Nice mix. Gritty but polished. Chopped but also layered. Who did I miss? A few in this decade who could have been mentioned, but I'm just going to go with Anthony Shake Shakir, a.k.a. Da Sampler. He was a prime shaper of Detroit techno, deserves a mention, blending electro, hip-hop, and funk, helping to popularize techno elements in first underground hip-hop, which then spread to the overground. He did not work with any ultra-famous people, which is why he's not mentioned on so many lists, but he's a true unsung hero because of his influence and innovations. 2000s, producer as beat architect. The rhythm becomes the foundation. Production shifts toward loops, grooves, sonic signatures, picking up on the developments of the 90s and expanding them. Hip-hop, R&B, and electronic influences reshape mainstream music. While the laptop begins replacing the traditional studio as the center of creation. Again, laptop's a buzzword. Most people were using desktops back in the 2000s. Laptops would come much more later. Technology shifts. Home computer-based production explodes. Software instruments become mainstream. Much more affordable instruments, electronics, plugins, affordable plugins, and that democratizes professional sounds. You could get any sound you wanted, even by the 2000s. Digital distribution begins changing the industry. Sound is beat-driven, minimal, futuristic, and instantly identifiable, but still pretty wide-ranging. Who did I miss? Similar to the 70s, there are several lesser-known producers who could be mentioned here, as well as one maybe better left forgotten, but I will mention anyway. And I'm just going to mention a few here. J.R. Rodham was the mastermind behind some massive mid-O's pop rap hits, the decade when rap showed it was ready to dominate, in no small part to his efforts. A synth-heavy pop rap sound, think Sean Kingston's Beautiful Girls. Bangladesh. Crunk was huge in the 2000s, and that was in large part because of Bangladesh. Club rap would not be the same without his work as well. Tight, brass-heavy sound like in Lil Wayne's Millie. Fortet, also a.k.a. Kieran Hebden, mixed electro, folk, and hip-hop in warm, ambient, organic ways. He influenced much of the EDM that followed. He worked and pop and things, and worked with a ton of artists, primarily as a remixer, such as Beth Orton, Block Party, one of my favorites, Tegan and Sarah, the XX, and Radiohead. And though reprehensible, if I can mention Phil Spector and some others, I have to bring up somebody else I missed in this decade, Dr. Luke. He was probably second only to Max Martin in the 2000s for his hook-driven, often rock-oriented tinged mainstream pop influence. He was huge in that decade. He worked with Kelly Clarkson, Kesha, Pink, Avril Lavigne, Miley Cyrus, Britney Spears, and of course, very famously, Katy Perry. And again, I'm not condoning him as a person or his actions. I'm just pointing out he did have musical impact. And I think Ian Kirkpatrick is kind of picking up on some of those cues now. 2010s, the producer is sound designer. Every song becomes its own universe. The producer's role expands beyond beats and arrangements into a complete sonic identity. Genre boundaries are collapsing, and producers are increasingly shaping the emotional atmosphere, textures, and sonic vocabulary of an artist and shaping the artists themselves, not to the degree they are now, but getting there. Technology shifts. Streaming becomes a dominant listening format in the 2010s. Mobile recording improves dramatically. And that's where we're talking about laptops and iPads and even phones. Cloud collaboration emerges, which would just blow up in the next 10 years. Massive sample plugin ecosystems develop. I'm a part of that. Social media changes discovery and workflow. Sound was increasingly genre fluid, increasingly atmospheric, hybrid, and texture focused. Who did I miss? It's not possible for me to profile all the producers I had to leave out in the 2010s, so I'll just mention a couple. Mike Dean, who snuck under the radar big time because he first helped to pioneer the Dirty South sound in the 1990s, stretched his influence to the West Coast in the 2000s, particularly with Kanye's first 3 albums, which were seminal, but didn't even make his greatest impact until the 2010s when he knocked it out of the park with artists like, again, Kanye, Travis Scott, and The Freaking Weeknd. So Mike Dean, why did I missed him, mentioning him now. And then Martin Garrix, probably one of the other biggest omissions here, on a par with Owen Bradley and Mike Dean. Huge architect of 2010s EDM, which was booming. Was considered one of the top DJs in that decade. Of course, still kicking ass today. He collaborated with artists like Dua Lipa, Bono and the Edge, Khalid, and more. Basically perfected the festival anthem, big and bold and full of energy and emotion. And one more, I did profile Sophie in the 2010s episode. I neglected to mention her tragic death, which did make the headlines. I remember it from back then. And it had a huge impact on both bringing attention to hyperpop and conversely slowing down its influence and dissemination, which I think is a sad thing, but it eventually picked up again. And some people are using it in small ways even now. 2020s, the producer is creative ecosystem. The producer becomes the entire creative environment. The modern producer is no longer just someone who makes records. They are often engineer, songwriter, performer, content creator, entrepreneur, and technological experimenter. Music creation itself becomes faster, more accessible, increasingly collaborative, but the contrastingly, producer takes more control. Technology shifts. AI enters the creative process a little bit. Advanced stem separation changes sampling and remixing. That's huge. Remote collaboration becomes standard. Spatial audio is developing. Independent creators are gaining professional level tools. We've all been doing that slowly but surely. The sound is boundaryless, personalized, and constantly evolving. Who did I miss in the 2010s? You can tell me this. Since this is this episode, I don't know who I missed. And let me know, and I'll add it to the next catch-up. Which brings me to, why did I do this series, and why does it matter? I might have mentioned in the first episode why I'm doing this, so I'll just do a brief recap. I am a studio rat. Confession. Hi, my name is Nick DiMatteo, and I'm a studio rat. I love music production, both as a doer and as a listener. I felt like there have been so many great producers through the decades, and some lesser-known gems, that they deserve discussion, as did production in a whole. And general understanding the components of music production, as well as its evolution, would be educational, fun, maybe even helpful to those of you out there either seeking a producer or wanting to be one yourself. DIY it, like it says on my shirt. Finally, production is such an important part of music, but it rarely gets talked about other than in the context of a specific review or if a producer becomes a name, a household name. Other than it deserved its own spot. Production deserved its own spotlight. That's why I did these 8 episodes. Now, why does it matter? Other than everything I just said, it matters because music production, well, let me say it this way. Music is a language unto itself, one that includes, but more importantly, transcends verbal communication. You don't need to know what the words mean if the music still works for you. I think of music production as the translation of that mystical language into something that most effectively gets across every aspect of the songs, albums, and artist's intent. That is, if done well, it's like when a bilingual author translates, let's say, a French book into English. That translation, if done well, there's no awkwardness. There's no pointing out unnecessarily that it came from another language other than certain idioms, idiosyncrasies, and references that are vital to the meaning of the story. And maintaining and sometimes even enhancing the author's intentions. A great producer knows how to bring out the best in a song, an album, and an artist, enhancing what's already there and adding in unthought of elements that grab you in ways the artist might not have thought of, but don't detract from the whole and don't change who the artist is unless they want to be changed. Inducing full and fluid translation of the music's meaning and intention with power, but somehow also staying out of the way. Not every producer does that. All of my favorite producers strike that balance because nearly every time, they know when to step in and when to step out. While my less favorite producers are either too manipulative, like I think Jack Antonoff, although who's to say? I don't work with him. Maybe I'm wrong. Or they don't do enough, which sometimes is the case with Rick Rubin. I think in many ways he does amazing work, but there are some artists where I felt like he could have jumped in a little bit more, made something a little more interesting. But speaking of, my favorite producer from each decade, because this is hard because you can't really equate producers of different genres, so don't consider this a best of list. And I'm not ranking them. It's just my strongest preferences from each decade. All right, so the 1950s, between Nelson Riddle and Lieber and Stoller, I'm going to give the edge to the more inclusive and forward-looking Lieber and Stoller, who were early hands-on producers in a way that wouldn't be that common for many decades, although, again, really love Nelson Riddle. 1960s, though I will always, always love Smokey and always respect Brian Wilson. Who else am I going to say but George Martin? 1970s, not easy, and I'd say from now on it might get much harder. It's a close call between hometown heroes Gamble and Huff, Philly Yo, highly influential but not as widespread as Giorgio Moroder, who disco, shaping, electronic, etc., and also Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers. Simply because of the more influential and forward-looking sound that would bleed heavily into the 1980s, I'm going to give my fave to Nile Rodgers, who would go on to work with so many amazing people. Speaking of, 1980s, maybe the hardest decade for me, we'll see. But though, you have to hand it to Quincy Jones. You have to hand it to Prince. And the underdogs, Full Force, always deserve more of a spotlight. For me, I got to give it to Trevor Horn. He is possibly the most closely associated with the classic 80s sound. And one of those producers where if you said, decade sound, boom, Trevor Horn. Doesn't happen in every decade. I'd say even with all of his success, he's still underrated. Listen to Art of Noise. Oh my God. 1990s. Okay, maybe this is the hardest decade. I don't know. It's pretty much an even split between two very different genres. Q-Tip and Brendan O'Brien. And though Brendan O'Brien has always been my kind of legacy favorite producer and has certainly influenced my sound, I'm going to give the edge to Q-Tip because he is a flat-out genius. And his style has influenced me more and more with each passing project. 2000s. I loved Jake Dilla, but only after the fact. I've always loved Mark Ronson's work. And I have to give it to Kanye in the 2000s, probably more than any other. But favorite, I'm going to go with the Neptunes because their sound revolutionized the way I thought of retro. They were retro-futuristic in a way that I hadn't really heard before. 2010s, there's more to choose from here than usual, and you can't deny Max Martin and all the great EDM producers, but I'm going to go left field, and I'm going to give a shout-out to me, The Drop, since this is the decade when I came of age as a producer. So my favorite 2010s producer, The Drop. Look me up. And 2020s, I mean, you know, Andrew Watt, Dan Nigro. I'm going to go with Dan Nigro. I'm going to go with Dan Nigro. And again, I'm going to go with Dan Nigro. Hey, Dan, call me up. Let's work together. And my favorite producer of all time, I mean, is there any doubt I'm going to say anybody but George Martin? He is one of the small handful of producers who helped to teach all future producers about what's possible and musicians and what are the best ways to incorporate your ideas while still allowing the artist to shine above the producer, something lots of today's producers could learn from. There's no doubt these producers and others have greatly influenced the work I do. But speaking of the work I do, featured song. As you know, I've been producing my own music 100% for well over a decade. I've been co-producing for a good 20 years and generally involved with producing my music and music for others for, believe it or not, 40 years. Since I was a teen. The song I'm choosing this week kind of ties a lot of that together because it's both old and new. I've mentioned these two things a few times. Number one, prior to Rec, I went under the artist name Nick, all caps, and released several EPs and albums. Number two, I am reviving Nick temporarily to work on an album called Valley of the Unreleased, which will feature songs I wrote during my Nick period but never recorded properly or at all, and certainly never officially released. The first song I put out was last year in Christmas time, my very first Christmas song, my Xmas Wish. The next song is one I released just a few weeks ago called Worthless. Like many songs from that era, it did not fit in any of the projects I was doing, and you were paying a lot of money back then. I couldn't afford to record everything. I also couldn't figure out how to finish it or flesh it out adequately. It wasn't sitting right with me, but I knew it was good, and it never left my brain all these years later. And though I needed the lyric and the chord sheet to refresh my memory, the one I found in an old notebook, I remembered the melody completely without ever having recorded it. It was still in my head after all these years. So like all the others I'll be releasing for this project, I fleshed out Worthless, staying true to its original intent like a good writer and producer, and improving elements that didn't work or weren't up to par, lyrics and some chords and things like that. I then recorded and produced it in a style that combines where I was then with where I am now. So Worthless and some of the others I'll be sharing soon really does create that past-present bridge. And it's about what the title says. Sometimes we feel worthless or know someone else feels that way. What do we do to combat that feeling? It's dark techno pop rock. As always, you can stream it at nickdimatteo.com/music, or even easier, just click the link in the episode text, which I always include, or even easiest, just hang out for a minute and you'll hear it. But please do consider streaming it because, nickdimatteo.com/music, it helps us all. Indie creators. Questions. What's grabbed your ears in the 2020s so far? Any trends you can spot? Where do you think music production is heading? What did you think of the series as a whole? Is there anything I left out? Anything you agree or disagree with? I'd like to know the answers to these and all other questions because, as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for the final episode of this great producer series, and I will talk to you next week.
Suicidal. Sometimes you feel nobody wants you. Words are only money. Money is time, and time's out to get you. a substance. What is substantial? Nothing's forever.